Hi there, I'm Tierney Sutton, and my new album is Paris Sessions 2, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. It's the home of Modernism Week, a week-long architecture and design festival that actually lasts 11 days. Again this year, U.S. Modernist Radio was there, speaking with nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers plus special guests. Most of them joined us poolside at the U.S. Modernist Compound, the retro Hotel Skylark on North Palm Canyon Drive in Palm Springs. If you're into mid-century modern, Modernism Week is a joyous festival of mid-century architecture, insightful lectures, plentiful martinis, shopping, nonprofit benefit events, and so much more. I'm Tom Guild. Some of that so much more included my chance to hear Ron Hicklin speak at camp during Modernism Week this year. Ron is not an architect or a designer, but you know his voice. For more than 40 years, Ron Hicklin was the most prolific backup singer and voice actor working behind the scenes in Hollywood. Ron's voice was part of the MASH theme. He was Alvin the Chipmunk. He sang Young Girl with Gary Puckett and the Union Gap. He sang McDonald's You Deserve a Break Today jingle, but he's not famous. He's humble. It's an amazing career, and I am so happy I got to know him during Modernism Week in Palm Springs. And now, the guy you can count on being first in line each morning at the U.S. Modernist Compound Waffle and Frittata line, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Did you mention bacon, Tom?
Oh,
I think there's bacon, too. I mean, it's an entire food group.
Yeah, it's not a separate line, though. I think you can get them all in one place.
You've got to add the bacon to the frittata and the waffle. And I don't know if it's the warm air or the cool breeze or the dryness, the lack of humidity, or just the fact that it's Palm Springs. But all the food tastes so good out there, particularly if you're eating it outdoors. Almost every meal can be al fresco, as they say in fresco. What is that, Italian?
I think it's Italian.
Italian, okay. If you're into mid-century modernism, Modernism Week is the Woodstock, the Olympics of everything that we love in architecture. It's just a huge number of events and parties and exhibitions wrapped up into the warm, sunny days and very cool nights. One of the things I love about getting there is arriving at the Palm Springs Airport or coming in on Highway 111 from L.A. You can just feel your body relax, like the stress is going out and the fun is coming in. You'd think I'm making this up, but people report this all the time, and it's one of the reasons why people keep coming back to Palm Springs and have for decades.
Especially because it's one of the few open airline terminals in the U.S. After going through O'Hare or Dallas, you walk out and you're outside almost immediately, and you stay outside.
Like you would experience in Hawaii. Of course, you would expect Hawaii to be like that. But
and Palm Springs.
Yeah. If you'd like to go with me and Tom to Modernism Week in February 2023 and stay with us, email me at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll. In a story that we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll worked her way through college, dancing like no one's watching to Mambo No. 5 and brilliantly house-flipping Neutra, sometimes simultaneously. At 22, following a celebrity-filled party at a famous hillside L.A. modernist house involving diving off the roof into the pool, absolute lemon, and a new use for WD-40, Angela was recruited to the architecture school, where after years of sleep-deprived design studios, she's now a modernist real estate agent with specialized training, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to saving a completely doomed mid-century house from destruction. That last one is true. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Ron Hicklin is the most famous voice you've never heard of. A successful singer since his junior high school days, Ron led the group responsible for some of the most iconic sounds of the 1970s, including vocals on the Partridge Family hit I Think I Love You, for which Ron and his group nabbed a Grammy nomination. He also sang some of TV's most memorable theme songs, like MASH, That Girl, Batman, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and the famous Mickey D's jingle, You Deserve a Break Today. Now a resident of Rancho Mirage, California, Ron was the first recipient of the Recording Academy's Best Background Male Vocalist Award. He shared some of the previously untold stories of his fascinating career during a Modernism Week talk I attended last February. Here's George's conversation with Ron Hicklin.
I had actually heard of you before, but you were kind of elusive. You were like that phantom that was off somewhere.
Yes, in the shadow.
And that's been really a hallmark of your career as you've been behind the scenes.
Exactly. We started with a 7-year contract with Capitol. When I came down from the University of Washington, I was studying pre-med. But anyway, when we were signed for that contract, same time Glenn Campbell and some of us were signed, I was about 2 years into it when I decided I didn't like to perform. I like to sing. And so I didn't want to sing in front of people as much. We played Vegas 5 times in the main rooms at the Riviera and the Dunes and other things in my quartet. But I found that I was so shy that I didn't want to stand in front of people and speak and try to be clever and try to do choreography and all that stuff. What I wanted to do was just to sing. And thank God my career evolved to a point where I did my first #1 record kind of as an accident. And from that point on, I started doing a first call on everything. And I put all the other singers together, and we did what we had to do.
What was that first hit record?
I was at home in North Hollywood. We were a little struggling beginning to our career. We were doing Shindig at the time.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That was big on TV.
Well, 3 of us from my quartet, the Eligibles, were on one side, and the Blossoms were on the other side. And we backed everybody that came in, and then we did our own numbers. In fact, Terry Garr was one of the dancers on that. Glenn Campbell, all of these people that were part of it, Leon Russell, there was a bunch of us together. Anyway, I was at home in North Hollywood one evening, and I got a call from Snuff Garrett and Bones Howe and Leon Russell in Hollywood and said, "We're trying to record this kid. Can you come down and help us?" And I said, sure. You know, I ran down, got in my car and went down to Hollywood and came in. Here's this kid standing there, and they said, listen to this, it's going nowhere. And I listened to the song, and I said, well, I'll put a harmony part on in the bridge with him. I did that, and I said, great, that gives it a nice lift. And then Bones Howe, who did the Mamas and Papas and stuff, Bones said, why don't you have Ron sing with him, mellow his voice out just a little bit, because it's very nasal. And I said, okay. So I sang lead with him all the way. And the record came out, and it was this Diamond Ring, which went #1. And then I still didn't know who he was. And suddenly, I just knew him, Gary Lewis. And then suddenly, a check shows up for me, and it's got Jerry Lewis's caricature on the check. And I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, what the... And I said, obviously that's Jerry's son. And the check had a note saying, thank you for what you've done for my son. And it was for $25. So I got $25 for the #1 record. And everybody would normally say, well, did you frame the thing? I said, no, I needed the $25.
Yeah.
But after that, what had happened is I created this situation where I was singing lead with him and doing all the background parts. So the second record was Count Me In. The third one was Just My Style, which the bass in my quartet wrote and sang the, don't you know, he sang the bass part in that thing, and I did all the other parts. And then we just did a whole series, like 10 straight. And the way that ended was like a lot of the artists, when suddenly they wanted to change the bag they were in. They were appealing to teenagers, basically.
Yeah.
And that was their following. So when they wanted to get arty or something, suddenly they lost their demographic.
Right.
And so when that started to happen, they didn't want Snuff and Leon to produce them anymore. They asked me if I would quit working with them. So I did, and they never had another hit, and that was it.
Well, when did the Partridge Family come along?
Well, after all of that success, there were a lot of other hit records that I did, but the Monkees came before that.
The Monkees came before that, okay.
So I did the Monkees, and it was David and Mickey and me. And I did the main title and all that stuff anonymously. Last Train to Clarksville, and I'm a Believer, and Free Like Me. And then the same thing happened with the Monkees. After the word got out that there was a ringer in the group singing, that nobody knew who it was, and a couple of guys weren't singing, it came out. And so the last year they said, well, we want to do it ourselves. So again, the bag changed. They lost the show. It went off the air. And they came back to me the following year and asked me to do one more record with them. And I did a duet with Davey on a song called Valerie. And that went to number one.
I remember that one.
Yeah. And then from that, Shorty Rogers called me once and he said, look, Cold Gems is doing another show. And it's a family thing, and Shirley Jones is starring in it. And he said, I'd really like you to put together a group. And I said, well, I'll put together a group, but I'm not singing with actors. I said, that didn't work in the other thing. And I said, so it'll just be the voices I put together. He said, fine. So we came down, and we did the pilot. And I put together the group that was going to be the Partridge Family. Audio only, not visually.
Right.
Yeah. So we went down and we recorded it. And then Shorty later called me and he said, Ron, great news. He said, there's good news and bad news. He said, the good news is it got the highest rating of anything outside of Mission Impossible as a pilot. So the show is going forward. And I said, well, what's the bad news? He said, they're replacing me regarding himself, because they wanted somebody that was more closer to the record industry. And so they replaced him. They decided, because I was so forceful in my thinking about how everything should be, that they would replace me. The other singers wouldn't go along with it. So it just became the four of us, Jackie Ward, myself, John, and Tom Baylor. And then by the third show, we found out that David could sing. And not
This
only
is David Cassidy,
David
the lead,
Cassidy,
yes.
yeah. Not only could he sing, but he was a great front for the thing. And so we did all the other singing, and David sang lead. And that was the Partridge Family. We did 5 straight gold albums, and, you know, it was just one of those things. We would go in and record all the stuff and then split.
Now, Shirley Jones was a beautiful singer, wasn't she?
Shirley Jones, the first time I met Shirley, I was doing The Music Man, and it was my first picture I ever did. And she was a gorgeous lady with a wonderful talent, both acting and singing. The problem in taking somebody like that and saying, okay, we're going to go into the pop record market and we're going to sell to teenagers or whatever, is that's not her bag.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's my objective opinion, is you sit there and say, okay, you put Shirley in Oklahoma or Carousel or one of these things, and she is just, you can't cast somebody better. Or even The Music Man.
Yeah.
She is perfect for that. But for doing MOR rock stuff, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I remember watching the show when I was 10 or 11 years old and watching poor Susan Day just kind of struggle to, you know, go through all the scenes when she was singing.
Well, I would just state this up front. The beauty of our career is it was totally audio. And I said, our careers are over if people are listening with their eyes.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they do. You walk out on stage as the Partridge Family, and there's 4 of us in our 40s. Forget it.
Yeah.
If you record all that stuff, and everybody's buying it, and it's the biggest thing since Presley, then wonderful. They don't know who you are, and they think it's somebody else. But the moment you could look at the screen and see these little kids or something and say, that's them singing.
Yeah.
You know, no, I don't think so. But we could sing to the bag. That's what the whole thing is. And putting that through the microphone and reaching the demographic you're trying to reach was a success story for us.
The happiest one in the Partridge Family was the little girl who just played the tambourine most of the time and didn't have to sing the songs.
Right.
She was just rocking out in all the scenes that they shot.
I know. The beautiful part of our career is I can point at things that are so varied. When people would say, well, what did you do? I'd say, okay, you got the Chipmunks over here.
Alvin and the Chipmunks?
Yeah, which I did for 40 years. And all the way to the other side of the spectrum, I got the three tenors. And I pre-did those with three tenors because Pavarotti didn't read music. So he would learn from what we did. And then...
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So he would just mimic you.
Yeah. And so I did all that with Lalo. But that was a spectrum. And then in between, you've got Dean Martin and Sammy Davis and Frank Sinatra and Andy Williams and Johnny Mathis and people like this that would require background voices in the studio. And then Indian Reservation that I did with Mark Lindsay, Paul Revere for the Raiders.
Okay.
And that turned out to be the fastest selling record of all time when we did it. So they took me back to Washington, D.C. to interview me for the copyright bill because they figured we were making so much money. And they said they were looking down their nose at the copyright bill, including any performers, just the writer and the publisher.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there trying to speak for the performers, saying, you do a record like that, and then every DJ at some party is playing your record, and he's getting paid, and you're getting nothing. I said, the same thing goes on when people are selling time and they're getting paid, but you're getting nothing. The Congress said, well, what did you make on that record? I said, $30. And they said, $30 for the biggest selling record? That's it. That's our scale. But I said, thank God it's $30 because when I started, it was $19.50 for an hour or for a record. And there was a 2-hour minimum. So you could make $45 and split. But what I found out is if I could do 8 songs in 2 hours, by casting it correctly in the group and really being good, we could just take whatever the scale was and multiply it rapidly.
And knock it right out.
Yeah. So all of that evolved into the movies that we did. The hits became the movies because they wanted to reach the same demographic. So from that, I did the main title for MASH for the movie, and the Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, we won the Academy Award with Bert on that. And then things like The Hunt for Red October, all the Russian singing in there was 25 of us in Hollywood. So those were all my groups. Dances with Wolves, Terms of Endearment, just,
wow.
I mean, amazing. There was about 400 pictures, all of the Dirty Harry stuff, all of,
So, Ron, you're really like the Forrest Gump of Hollywood here. I mean, you just show up everywhere that something is happening.
Well, that's what happened is with my string of hit records, to get me on the vocal call, they just put me in charge. So I would hire all the other singers as well. But you had to be a performing member of the group. I know because I wrote the rules at that time for AFTRA. I sat down, I was a singer's chairman nationally, and I wrote the rules that you had to be a performing member of the group. Otherwise, like if you're going to go down, you're going to go down because of what you did, not because of what somebody else did. So every time out, my attitude was, as long as we keep producing hit records, we will be coming back. The moment you can't do that, they're going to find somebody younger, hungrier, better attitude. And by the time I was done, I mean, I'd started a couple companies then, and Killer Music and Killer Tracks, and I'd built 5 studios in Hollywood for my work and all that. So it was starting from nowhere, it became a really big deal.
Now, there was this period of time, I think late 60s, really through about the early 80s.
Yes.
Where a lot of these TV shows had catchy soundtracks with vocalists, which really got phased out over time. I can remember Love American Style. Was that one of yours?
Love American Style was ours. And that, because Charlie Fox wrote that, he also wrote Laverne and Shirley, and he wrote Happy Days. And what happened when we did Happy Days, because Laverne and Shirley came out of Happy Days, and when when he did Happy Days.
And Happy Days came out of Love American Style, too.
Yes.
It was Love and the Happy Day.
Yes, exactly. And I had done American Graffiti, which was the same thing.
Yeah,
you
right.
know. So he called me down, and Charlie and I worked on the main title, and we did the main title on that. And when that was done, then they said, well, would you get the three of you to do all these little do bridging cues?
Yeah.
And I did the bridging cues with three of us. And then they said,
So it's
well,
love, love, love,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And then they said the Fonz goes over and hits the jukebox and it plays records. Well, what they decided to do was to hire me to do all the records. So I would go in, I would write the sound-alike music for a month, and then hired the other singers. And we'd go in and for 3 days solid, working about 12, 14 hours a day, we would record.
You'd make up the jukebox.
I'd make up the jukebox. And I would record a song about every 20 minutes.
Okay.
And just nail the sound-alikes, put them out there, whether it was the Coasters or the Temptations or the Miracles or the Beach Boys or whatever we were doing at the time. And then I was off for the rest of the year, as far as that show was concerned.
Yeah.
They'd take the same stuff at the same time and have me do Laverne and Shirley, because I did the main title on that too. And they would use at least 2 records in every show. So we were paid for every show for all time.
That's great.
That was 11 years I did Happy Days and 9 Laverne and Shirley. So those were great jobs.
We just had Don Most on the show, who is doing jazz singing now.
I did an album with Donnie Most.
Yeah.
And also with one of the others. He was one of the lead.
Anson Williams?
Yes. And they were all nice guys. I got along great with all of those guys. In fact, that was a wonderful cast of people to deal with. I produced a record within Happy Days of Joni and Chachi singing together, and I produced it.
That spun off their little series.
And that spun off theirs. Even Robin Williams' thing came out.
Mork and Mindy.
Yeah,
came out
Mork
of
and
that.
Mindy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a wonderful time, a wonderful show, because I was not on camera or having to go through blocking or waste my time with all of that kind of stuff at $8 an hour or whatever they'd pay you, you know. I was running around doing Sonny and Cher. I did 19 of those, but we pre-recorded everything. So we didn't have to be on camera. We didn't have to do it. And you'd run from one thing to another. And the movie calls, they were great, because the chance to work with James Horner, I did everything with James, and he did Titanic and Braveheart and Apollo 13 and Glory.
Yes.
One of the things I did in Glory, to this day, I tear up even talking about it, because he was such a perfectionist, and so was I. And I hired 50 singers, and we did where everybody's charging the fort and getting killed, carrying the flag at Fort Sumter. And he wrote it in 3 different languages. And I ran it down with the voices, and the whole room was full of musicians, too. And James said, well, let's take one. Let's try one and see what happens. And we went through it. And it's a long queue. He says, everybody take a break. And he goes in the booth. He comes back out, and he says, thank you very much. Good night.
Wow.
And so it was one of those things where I sat there for 2 hours looking at I-9s and contract signatures and on all the singers that I hired, 50 singers. I'm 2 hours just sitting there doing bookwork, and it occurs to me that I didn't think anybody on earth could do that way. Then when I saw the movie and I saw what was happening, I walked out. I couldn't even speak. It was just terrible.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Now, I remember in Love American Style, in those little bridges.
Yes.
There was Stuart Margolin, who was always leering at some woman going across the screen. He was the Benny Hill of his time. Do you remember those little things? Because your voices were always coming up behind him in those little connectors between the shows.
No, I know. Quite honestly, my wife is so upset with me, because she would say, certainly you remember this or this or this or this. And I said, no, I don't. And she said, well, why is that? You have such a sharp memory. And I said, because I averaged 18 hours in front of a mic for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I said, it wasn't we were trying to be somebody else. Other people were trying to be us. But we did all the station breaks for around the world, and we did everything that could be done. And we established, I worked with the Beatles, I worked with the Beach Boys, and it says everything that could be done, we were doing. And it was just, I never had a chance to watch the shows we did. I never had a chance to listen to stuff. And when I retired, I have to tell you, George, when I retired, I lost my voice while I was doing Snow Falling on Cedars, and I was 61 at the time. And we went about 14 hours into that call, and suddenly everybody's coughing, and I realized what's happening to my voice, because my voice was never out of shape.
Yeah.
It wasn't nodes or anything, and it was a condition called spontaneous dysphonia or something that happened. And Jimmy Rogers, clear back in the early 60s, that happened to him, and he had 3 straight hit records, and suddenly he was history. He couldn't talk. So that's what happened to me, and then I thought, well, it's been a wonderful career. Thank you, God.
Yeah, if you look up your IMDb page, it's just packed.
Someday I want to sit down with somebody who's a techie that can show me how to edit some of that stuff, because I've seen stuff in Wikipedia that people said, oh, you ought to see what's in there. And I've looked, and I said, they're even crediting the wrong people for some things.
Well, it's Wikipedia and so forth. There are some errors in those kind of things.
If I knew how to edit it, I would jump right in and make it right before I pass on.
So you did a lot of animated shows, too. You did The Jetsons.
Yeah. When you ask about main titles, I did set the record on main titles. I did 62 main titles for television.
Yeah.
So that was a huge amount. But I did all those Scooby and Scrappy Doos and the Inspector Gadget and obviously the Chipmunks for all of that time.
Yeah.
And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And my wife actually was the producer. She worked as the vice president of the animation company that started the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Okay.
So she was producing all that stuff.
Now, I remember in The Jetsons, of course, their theme song is really sort of the anthem of mid-century modern. It's these guys are living in the future, and all the furniture that in The Jetsons is drawn from Eames and Sarnon and the big designers that were going on at that time. And I remember in the Flintstones, there were a number of shows where they had people singing.
Yeah.
Like the most memorable ones, I think, were when Anne Margaret was on as a guest star.
Oh.
And they had her singing in the background. And then you had Pebbles Flintstone. The girl would sing,
yes,
in these.
Pebbles and
Bam Bam.
Bam Bam. There were albums done at that time.
Really?
Actually, yeah, of Pebbles and Bam Bam. And Stan, who was in my quartet when I formed my quartet. We were living in a housing project, and I was 11 years old, and I was the youngest in the group. The other 2 of them were a year ahead of me, and the bass was 2 years ahead of me in school. And we did a talent show on King TV in Seattle when I was a freshman in high school, and we won and ended up with an hour show for my sophomore and junior year. But by then, the other guys had graduated, so I didn't put it back together again until I was at the University of Washington in pre-med, and I put a quartet together, the same group, basically, and we won Songfest. And the Fiji Quartet, we were the Sigeps. The Fiji Quartet turned out to be the Brothers Four, and they were signed by Columbia, and they had a hit record.
Nice, yes.
Yeah, they had a hit record. We were signed by Capitol, and then all of the career just kind of evolved from there. So when Eric and I were talking about doing this show, I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time on my quartet, because the evolution of what you can do and your abilities and the people that you work with and all of that became what was our career. You don't stand still. I listened to everybody that came to Los Angeles, and I advised them on what they should be putting on their demo reels and try to get to understand what they were up against, because we were up against the same thing. When you get there and you realize, my God, the talent is so good.
And there's so much of it.
Yeah. I had a decent talent, but one of the greatest things I had was my objectivity of saying, I don't want to cast myself out in front. what I want to do is I want to sit there and say, okay, you want this, you want that, you want that. You've just hired the greatest chameleon you've ever seen.
Yes.
And be the best group singer I could possibly imagine. Even though I was the lead singer in my quartet, I didn't want to do that because you would get bagged. So I could go from working with Michael Jackson to, working over here, in country or doing other things, as long as I understood the demographic I was trying to reach and what they liked.
Know your audience, right?
Yes,
That's
exactly.
the mantra.
Exactly.
That's the mantra.
Yeah. You're not trying to teach somebody something. You're trying to hit them where they live. It doesn't matter if they know you shouldn't have parallel thirds or you shouldn't have, this or that, the other thing.
That's what I tell people all the time. No parallel thirds. Do not do that. Now, speaking of your legacy, Ron, I've been told you have 13 file cabinets at least of material. What's going to happen to these? We want to make sure they don't end up in a yard sale somewhere. Are they going somewhere?
I will tell you what I did. When I retired, I was so used to working around the clock in the studios that I sat down and anything I had to tape on, I didn't want it to decay and to rot someplace.
Yes.
So I started converting those into digital and putting it into my iTunes and my computer.
Okay.
So then after spending about the first 5 years doing that, I decided, okay, and I didn't have all the records I did, but I had a lot. And so I said, now what I want to do is I want to take 13 file cabinets across my 3-car garage that are full of things. When people would say, did you do such and such with Presley? And I'd say, yeah, I did 3
Let me
movies.
look under P.
Yeah, no, not that. It's just like they're all in chronological order.
Okay.
And I would sit there and say, can you tell me when it was? And then I can go get the contract. I can tell you who was on it. I can tell you what we made. I can tell you the titles that we recorded. I can tell you all that. But I would have to know when, because it was all in chronological order. And that was all commercials, movies, everything. So then I started taking my time and digitally putting it in my computer under different things, contracts, commercials, records, whatever.
Sure.
And now, my God, what a stroke of genius that was, because I let go of all of those cabinets and all of that paperwork. And when somebody says, did you do a session with Presley in 1968 on such a, just a second, search Presley, boom, there it is. There's everything I did with Presley, and all the contracts are there. Did you do Elton John? Yeah, boom, there it is. Bring it up, and say, yeah, here's who was there, here's what we made. And so there's been so many books that have come out of where people have interviewed me because I was there.
Right. But get to my question here. What are you going to do with all these digitized files? Is some institution going to take them over?
Not that I know of.
Well, okay, that's what I'm telling you. You got to have a succession plan here. Because if you get hit by the bread truck tomorrow, we want to make sure that this fabulous collection of records is not endangered. This is what we do as an archive.
It never occurred to me, because all I could think of is in my trust and my wills, I have told my daughter that my computer or whatever music that I have that way is, she's in line for it.
And it's backed up, right? You have duplicates?
I do.
Okay.
We're
just giving you safe practices here, Ron, to make sure that all this stuff is not endangered.
I put it in the cloud someplace as well, because somebody told me, says, somebody broke in and stole your computer, it's gone.
Right.
Because you've already destroyed the tapes, already destroyed the contracts and everything else. So, yeah. That's what it is.
Well, if we can help you with any of that, please let us know, because we're all about preservation.
Right here, these are little CDs. Those are sheets that show some of the things I was going to talk about today. I did Holly Holy with Neil Diamond, 18 Singers, the Last Train to Clarksville, the Young Girl, Get Out of My Life. I forgot about Gary Puckett and Union Gap. I did all of those.
Yeah.
Indian Reservation. When I fall in love with the Letterman, they hired me, and I sang an octave above the lead all the way through to give it that brightness. And All My Lovin' with the Chipmunks, This Diamond Ring, Come On, Get Happy, the main title for the Partridge Family. I Think I Love You, Partridge Family, Arizona, Mark Lindsay,
Candyman,
Just My Style, Woman, Precious and Few, Suicide is Painless was the main.
That was an instrumental, wasn't it? Basically,
No, the movie came out.
The movie was the
movie
word.
came out, and it was a vocal.
Okay, but the TV
Suicide
series
is painless, brings on
run many changes.
But I can take or leave it if you please.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
that kind of thing. That was 4 of us. In fact, we did the arrangement ourselves for Johnny Mandel because he wanted us to get closer to the record industry.
Yeah. You deserve a break today with McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The commercials I did, that's when I formed Killer Music. The first 3 things I did all won Clio Awards.
The advertising industry awards. Yes.
The demo I did, we took a call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon from Chicago, from Wheaties, wanting us to try to do something. We wrote something. I booked the studio at 6 that evening in Pasadena. We mixed it and sent it to Chicago for their 9 o'clock presentation the next morning, and it won the Clio Award. It's the best in the country. And that was the first thing we did, and that was Go Tell Your Mama What the Big Boys Eat for Wheaties.
Oh, yeah.
Go tell your mama what the big boys eat. And then there were things like the raisins, the first 2 raisin things, California raisins I did, both won Clios.
Oh, yes, the California raisins.
Yeah, and they both won Clios. All of Budweiser, all the cars, Kawasaki Lets a Good Times Roll, all of those commercials. It was like thousands of things, and I was doing 3 or 4 sessions a day just on that in my company. Yeah.
Well, Ron, I could talk to you all day, but we're out of time.
Yeah, you can thank God for that because I could go on forever.
But this has been such a pleasure, and I want to close with letting you all know that the Recording Academy honored Ron with its very first Best Background Male Vocalist Award.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you very much, George. Appreciate it.
That was George with legendary background singer Ron Hicklin.
After World War II, it was a hugely optimistic time. Modern architecture was at its peak. The future was going to be bright, and life was going to be much easier. Popular music, from big band to swing to rock, had album covers and liner notes that inspired Americans who yearned to be more modern. All of this helped generate today's huge consumer culture, and it's the subject of a new book. Author Janet Borgerson is the Senior Wicklander Fellow at the Institute for Business and Professional Ethics at DePaul. When she's not publishing research, she's thinking and writing about the intersection of music and modernist design. Inspired by the Monkees and a writing fellowship at Cranbrook, the Hogwarts of modernism. Author Jonathan Schroeder is the professor of communications at Rochester Institute of Technology. Together, they wrote Design for Hi-Fi Living, the Vinyl LP and Midcentury America. Here's Tom's conversation poolside in Palm Springs with Janet Borgerson and Jonathan Schroeder.
We're not talking about architecture, we're talking about dance.
We have our first book in this vein was called Design for Hi-Fi Living, the vinyl
Just to
LP
give you a sense.
in Midcentury America.
So open it up and take a look at the pictures. Those are all record album covers.
Oh, they are. Oh, wow.
So we analyze, dig
we're
into
interested in the
record album
design.
covers.
But modernism was a frame for this whole project, to think about record albums as mid-century media. And to think
because of record album covers are a lost art now.
And so in the first book, we had a chapter on modern art and design where we featured, modernist.
My parents had so many records like this.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
That guy who did that cover is named Joe Crush, and he worked for the Ghost Army. And
the inflatable tanks in World War II.
The people who created camouflage
early stereo to
design
confuse the enemy.
things to create disruption and confusion in the war arena. So that guy.
Okay,
did
the
that
inflatable army
cover.
was in stereo? Or we...
they used early versions of stereo to kind of broadcast noises.
Oh, was sound part of that too?
So you might have
part
thought that air jets were flying in from this side and leaving from that side, that there are
they used
trains
sound
coming
as
and
part of
going.
the Ghost Army.
The Ghost Army had a huge role in creating fake
There was something about them in the news just recently that they're being recognized finally.
Yeah, I think one guy
Maybe they're
was
getting
in it.
VA benefits. So, okay, this is Designed for Dancing.
That's our new book.
That is your new book.
Yeah.
And this is your second?
Well, in this series, this is our second book. And the final in the trilogy is Designed for Success, Better Living Through Instructional Records.
Okay. And the first one was called...
Designed for Hi-Fi Living.
They're all designed for.
Okay.
And the Hi-Fi Living
And
really...
then this is Designed for Dancing.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Designed for Success.
I'm getting the thread here now.
Yeah. We focused quite a bit on mid-century design in our first book, and it's still a thread in this book as well, just thinking about how these designers and photographers were influenced by modernism particularly, but also just the records as a kind of part of the modernist project of having a better lifestyle,
Yeah. I mean, you're obviously music lovers.
Yeah. And record lovers and vinyl collectors.
So what was the first record that really excited you?
The first record I remember buying with my own money was the soundtrack to the movie Shaft.
Okay.
Isaac Hayes.
He's a bad.
Yeah, that was, I love that kind of music. Early 70s, Sly and the Family Stone Greatest Hits, that was another one. I remember trying to dance in my living room, with that, and my dad telling me to turn the stereo down.
Yeah.
When I was in grad school, there was a St. Vincent de Paul around the corner, and I'd had records all along, but that was the first time when I would see them laid out from every genre, all the different eras, and I suddenly started seeing more Hawaiian records and also records that were easy listening.
And where were you growing up? Where was this?
I grew up in Michigan, but I went to grad school in Madison, Wisconsin.
And so this was the record store that...
This is the St. Vincent de Paul. It was a charity shop, but they had a record section, just like a book section.
Right, so used records.
We used records. So instead of doing my papers that I was supposed to be doing on Kant or whatever, I would go and I would peruse the vinyl section and they were 25 cents, 50 cents, and the covers were colorful. They were kind of wacky champagne glasses with women in them along with the ice cubes, and I just thought, these are kind of fun. These are super interesting. So I think Jonathan and I both had kind of a similar experience in that era of seeing covers that were goofy and colorful and thinking, for 25 cents, I'm gonna take that home.
So did you guys bond over records and music, or
we grew up together? So
our over childhood.
Yeah, our parents were friends. Janet's mother was a choir director, so I sang in Janet's mom's choir when I was young. And
can he sing?
Yes.
Yeah, I was a bass. Janet was a soprano.
In the end.
In the end.
When we were 4, there wasn't much distinction.
And, in high school, we knew each other. We were kind of attracted to each other, but we weren't really dating. But I was always trying to sneak Janet into these bars to go dancing.
Yeah, so we were dancing together when we were in high school.
So how did mid-century music help America learn to dance?
Well, the records.
Yeah.
Our sense was, with Designed for Hi-Fi Living, that the covers were trying to communicate something, teach something about taste, about how we were going to become a modern nation after World War II, coming out of another era completely.
Right.
And we featured those records teaching us something, giving us a sense of where to travel, how to get a passport, how to learn a language, those kinds of issues. But when we decided what's the second book going to be on, we looked at the covers and we thought, these are colorful. We've got a lot of them. What was going on with the rumba, the square dance, the mambo, the twist, the hula, the limbo? Why all these dance records, other than the fact that you'd play a record to dance in your home?
We featured, in the Designed for Hi-Fi Living book, we featured a chapter on, there's a series from Columbia Records called Music for Gracious Living. And they hired an modernist architectural photography firm called Hedrick Blessing in Chicago. And they had photographed all the great mid-century modernist architects. And so Columbia Records hired them for this series And the series, basically, it's almost like a Martha Stewart magazine of entertaining. You know, there was a buffet record.
After the dance.
After the dance, how to have a party in your open-plan mid-century home.
And so the cover photos were wonderful because they were created by this photography firm that had a role of communicating modernist values. And when they created those covers, they laid out the kitchen so that you could think, that's how I want my kitchen to look. Or they laid out the living room so that you might think, that's how I want my living room to look. And then on the back cover, they would tell you how to plant your patio. They would tell you how to make the recipes of the food featured on the front. So recipes and design,
How to mix cocktails, martinis.
Yeah, how to have a dinner party, how to entertain in your new suburban lifestyle house.
Yeah.
Were the covers more photographs, or were they?
Those were photographs.
Okay, photographs.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Most of the people on the cover were white.
It was definitely a vision of kind of that white suburban world. But one of the chapters in the Design for Hi-Fi Living book, we focused on mid-century modern furniture. And there you saw a number of black musicians sitting in significant chairs. So there's the pianist, the jazz pianist Ahmad Jamal, sitting in George Nelson's MAA chair. 1958. That chair had just come out. And so here he is kind of at the center of modernism. So we were really attracted to those kind of images where the only prop on the record cover was a mid-century modernist chair.
And then you have Nancy Wilson, the singer, in an Eames chair, along with
George Shearing.
So
in a way, they were kind of breaking down some barriers in a safe way. Because we're used to African Americans as entertainers. And look, here they are in these trend-setting places. Gee, that looks great.
Exactly. And I mean, once you get to the dance records, though, because a basic feature of dance, other than square dance, waltz, is the rhythm, is the drum. And the record album covers themselves bring up the issue of how did these rhythms, how did these drums come to be part of the U.S. acoustic lifestyle. And a number of them focus on slavery. How did these dances and steps come to be in the U.S.? Well, they were imported by people enslaved and brought from Africa. So
and that story appears in the liner notes.
Yeah, in the liner
covers,
notes.
You know, so it's not
really.
As if, it's not as if we're taking a 21st century vision and going back and saying, oh well, how would these talk about slavery? No, they in the liner notes they bring up slavery, especially records like
Limbo records.
And a number of the Caribbean dances. They specifically bring it up, and that's part of the story of the dance.
Liner notes are another kind of lost art. Did they play much of a role in what you were putting together in your book? Yeah.
I mean, we call this project the Analog Rescue Project. So we've been collecting records for, 30 years now. And we began to look at them and try to understand them as, in one part, as mid-century media. Because people have done a number of different areas, obviously advertising, film, literature, and kind of looked at that through this mid-century modernist lens. But no one had really done record albums and album cover art. And so part of the project certainly was to kind of read the liner notes, see who's writing what, and what stories do they tell about post-war America.
And also because the records themselves form a material archive. We have access to that archive. These are our records. And so whether you had a box of important photographs, whether you had access to architectural homes, you would have access to those and you could tell other people about them.
Right.
So in that sense, we have access to the analog archive of these vinyl records. And so part of what we're doing is trying to describe them and represent them so that people who do not have access to them could see what was in the liner notes. So we quote the liner notes extensively in different parts of the book. Each album probably has a couple of quotes so that people feel like they have learned something about each of the record albums in a historical sense.
It's kind of like a cultural encyclopedia.
Yeah, it is.
That people had
for vinyl
on
records.
their record shelf.
Yes,
next
indeed.
to the World Book.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the liner notes do work that you might not expect.
And I think we're specifically interested in some of the records that have been forgotten or a little bit more obscure. You know, we didn't write much about the Beatles or Elvis Presley, lots of books on those. But we were interested in these lifestyle records, records that showed design, records that featured interesting buildings, and records that taught you how to entertain in the 50s.
Yeah, I was flipping through the book. I saw many interesting covers, but not one that I recognized
That's interesting.
from, not specifically.
No, we did not try to capture the...
How many covers are in the book?
In the Design for Dancing book, there's about 300 covers.
Okay. Wow.
And wow, was it difficult. We picked out about 500 covers that we absolutely had to include in the book. The publisher said...
Okay, there's a
no.
volume 2.
The publisher said, no, let's keep it to about 300. We wrote up about 350 at the end, and so at the very end of writing the book, we had to toss out 50, which was very difficult. Janet was crying. It's like, we wrote about this. We can't.
Extra material for something else now.
But we tried to pick examples that told interesting stories. So the Design for Dancing book is a lot about American identity. You know, how these dances express different types of identity. Ethnic identity, like polka, Polish American, Latin. You know, why did Americans learn to Latin dance, and what was Latin about it? And that was one of the big themes, along with issues of fashion and design.
Yeah, fashion was probably another part of that. And I mean,
we dedicated a chapter to fashion because when you're looking at the record album covers for the dance record, it was clear that some of those dresses, some of those men's trousers, some of those shoes, some of those hairstyles, they were iconic. They were emblematic of a particular kind of rhythm or a particular style. And so we had to have a chapter that allowed us to focus in on the ball gown or the mini skirt or the polka dot dress for the square dance. So we have a fashion chapter.
And kids would have these records, and while you're listening to it, what's your visual aid? Those covers got stared at.
Yeah, you got stared at. That's right. Yeah, that's totally right.
Well, and we have a whole chapter on records that were specifically meant to teach you how to dance. So how to do the tango. You know, they'd have those little footprint patterns.
Right.
They'd have, maybe one side was spoken word, where they're telling you how to move your feet, and then the other side would be the music that you're supposed to dance to.
Are any of these records like that still in print?
Yeah, I mean, 2 of the big series in the Let's Learn to Dance chapter are from Arthur Murray. So the Arthur Murray Studios, he produced lots of records. And then Fred Astaire as well. He produced a number of records. And those have been re-released, again and again. For us, it was interesting to see how they were originally released in the early 50s with beautiful kind of illustrated covers. And then the same records were re-released in the 60s with photographic covers. So it was interesting to see how the graphic design style changed over the years as well.
And we tried to include both of those.
Do you think the decision to make that change was intentional or just
I think it was based on
legal? They lost rights to use the artwork?
The fashion for record album covers went from, in many cases, the illustrated to the photographic.
Yeah, that's really one of the themes we focus on a lot, is the design issues and considerations in creating these covers. We kind of rediscovered some photographers and artists who were known for their record covers.
Were there, I guess you're answering my question, there must have been some photographers and cover designers who recur in this.
Oh, yeah, and initially, we were more interested in the objects on the covers, like the coconut chair or the Eames lounger. That's what got us to look twice. But now we've become familiar with the styles of some of the photographers and the illustrators. So now it'll be like, oh, there's a Moselle Thompson, or oh, there's another, Wendy.
David B. Hecht, Wendy Hilty. Yeah. We've kind of gotten to know these and begun to recognize their style.
Do you know if any of them are still around?
Most of the ones that we looked at are gone.
Yeah.
I mean, an interesting one that we'll talk about here at Modernism Week is he was a well-known fashion photographer named Ormond Gilly. And he's known for a fashion photograph in the 60s called Girls in the Window. It was a big brownstone in New York. He had female models pose with beautiful, bright dresses and gowns. And that's really one of the most famous fashion photographs of the 60s. He did a number of record album covers.
Yeah.
And so it was really fun to discover some of his work on the record albums because, he's not really known as a record album photographer. And so those kind of finds are interesting to see the connections between fashion photography and the glamorous world of Hollywood and the art of record album design.
Do you dance?
We do dance. We don't know every single dance that we talk about in the book, and we had big plans.
You have all these resources to learn how to dance.
Well, we had big plans
and then
to
COVID hit.
get into some mambo rumba lessons, and then COVID hit, and the person we were going to take lessons from, they weren't teaching during that time, so we got a little stalled. But
we're going to try to demonstrate the twist at our talk.
We're good at 60 stances, but some of those
my parents learned the twist. That was one of the most embarrassing moments of my childhood.
God, that's so funny. Thinking about the effect on the kids of the parents branching out.
You doing that.
Yeah.
Do you discuss the dance, the Batusi from Batman?
The Batusi.
We didn't talk about the Batusi. We do have a Watusi record in the book, and that cover's by a well-known album cover photographer named Ed Thrasher. And
I think I recognize that name.
He, among other things, did the Nancy Sinatra Boots cover. And he also did a number of Jimi Hendrix covers. So he really comes into the 70s rock era. But he also did this funny series of 60s dance covers, the Monkey, the Watusi, and one more.
And
was it the Swim?
The Swim was a big one. Yeah.
Those covers have a lovely scarlet brownish tone capturing the movements on the dance floor for all of them. It's really
that was a recurring issue in how do you make, with still photography, how do you show the movement of dance?
Yeah.
And so a number of the illustrators and photographers were very creative in trying to show this movement, and almost as if the covers are little motion pictures.
So the Bobby Freeman Swim, you mentioned the Swim, it has multiple
images.
cells. And here he is when his one hand is up, here he is when his hand's on his nose, here he is when the other hand is up. And so you can almost learn to do the movements from each
That's
of the...
That's like the Olympics just finished, but they had all the ice skaters in their jumps. They're looking in the paper, and there's like
the
12
motion.
Images. Yeah, the stop motion. So I could probably learn how to do a quad axel from that.
That's how I feel about looking at some of those rumbas. It's like, no, you're not going to be able to teach me using those photos.
So you gave a talk this year at camp about this book.
Yeah. We focus quite a bit on the issues of design and photography, but also just this sense that album cover design is one aspect of the mid-century that people haven't worked on quite as much as other forms, like film and architecture and furniture design.
And because we think of it as the analog rescue project, it isn't unlike some of your architectural rescue projects where you make an effort to keep houses from being torn down.
Yes.
And so part of finding the records that are in here that are obscure, that are taken from bargain bins that most people pass over, is the sense that we can bring them to the fore and give them attention that otherwise they wouldn't have. And maybe the next time someone's going through a bin and they see, Music for Latin Lovers, they'll think, oh, that was featured in that book. That's an interesting record, and they said there were some songs on there that are worth listening to. So in a sense, we also have a rescue project. It just happens to be for vinyl record albums.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, George has probably scanned about a gazillion architectural magazines over the years to create an archive. Maybe you need to add LPs.
Maybe so. I mean, I just think about that as the music industry has evolved, that the album cover, which was originally, 12 by 12, 14 by 14?
12 by
12 by 12.
Yeah, okay. And then we have the CD.
5 by 5.
5 by 5. And now we have streaming with nothing.
The little icons,
you do have the little icons. And I think that's an aspect of the new streaming that's interesting to us is you still get the cover, but it's tiny.
Well,
Like
but you
a
can
quarter of
click
an
on
inch
it.
by
You
a
can
quarter
click
of
on
an
it
inch.
and
I
expand
mean,
it.
in a way, it's a rebound of art
Yeah.
combined with music. But yeah, there for a dark period in the 90s.
Oh, no.
Cassettes and CDs, everything was miniaturized.
Tiny.
Yeah, I mean, in our collecting, it really accelerated during the 90s. And really, there were no new records available in the 90s. They just weren't releasing
New
much
vinyl records.
Right.
Yeah.
So we like records. We started buying lots of used vinyl. And that was kind of the start of this book writing project.
I want to get that book. I've got to get that book.
Please get it and expand your sense of what your rescue project is to include
So
vinyl LPs from Midcentury.
Is it available now on
Yeah.
all them usual places?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's distributed by Penguin Random House, so it's pretty widely available.
Okay. You're going to do an audiobook version?
We keep thinking about it. We do have a Spotify playlist designed for dancing, and we have some Spotify playlists for the various chapters, like Latin and folk.
Yeah, our
Right.
publisher wasn't so interested in getting involved in the audio aspect, but for us, of course, having that intersection of the audio with the visual made perfect sense. So we have created 3 playlists so far, and we'll probably continue to create them so that if people wanted to, they could look at the book, go to Spotify.
That's probably the way you
and
got
then
to do
click
it on account of lawyers.
Just to get a sense.
Rights.
Yeah, we'd have to. Well, we got rights for all of the images in the book.
Okay.
So that was a
Well,
process in and of itself.
Right.
You have to write to the companies. You've got to figure out the email of the person at the obscure,
Yep. And
possibly
people
out
think
of business.
that's really easy to do. And
No. If you
No.
can't find the right email, it's very difficult to get the permissions.
Well, we have Frank Sinatra's A Swingin' Affair in the book, and that was released by Capitol Records. When we wrote to Capitol, they said, we don't own that. The family bought those rights back.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm scurrying around and finally found the lawyer who's in charge of that.
the Sinatra estate, basically.
The Sinatra Family Trust, basically. And so he writes me back. He said, well, just tell me what you want, and the family will have to approve it. So I'm thinking, Nancy Sinatra's looking over this book project.
Probably, yeah.
And saying yay or nay. But they said yes in the
Good.
end, and they were very supportive.
What we
So-
loved about that record, the Swinging Affair record with Frank Sinatra, is that his face image and his hat is kind of hovering in the foreground, but in the background is a picture of more normal dance hall people. They're not all models. It's just a photograph of people out for the evening dancing, and so we really like that juxtaposition of the celebrity with the everyday people, because we think those record albums teach us something, and in a sense that's permission to go ahead and go out and do what you've seen in Frank's movies.
Yeah, that was one of a tension that we noticed in these records, is you could play the record at home and have a dance party in your home, or you could play them and get ready to go out.
Oh, yeah, like a
one
warm-up.
One of the theme chapters in the book is going out. And so we ended up writing about records that were either set in a hotel or a ballroom or even a cruise ship.
Yeah.
And so then we began to talk a little bit more about the architectural design. And what's the one, the Arawak Hotel?
The
That's a fun
Arawak
one.
Hotel is the Lapidus. It's in Ochos Rios, Jamaica. And we did some research on the Fairmont in San Francisco, and there's one night out at the Plaza, and it was interesting to look at the historical record, whether it was applications for historical landmark status or whether it was just talking about the terrarium in the Miami Americana Hotel that had the alligators in the terrarium. Either way, there was this sense that
Was that on a record
hotels
cover?
played a record. Unfortunately, no. That's a footnote to the Lapidus designed Arawak Hotel.
Because these are artifacts too, we find interesting notes and things in the records. And so that on the cover of the dance at the Arawak Hotel, someone had written it in like room 257. So we kind of make up the story that, someone got this record signed by the band member. Instead of, signing their name, they signed their hotel room.
Yeah.
So they could come up for a late night rendezvous. So interesting stories.
It's all about fantasy,
I
these
guess
travel records.
Because of these material objects, what they contain within part of this archive.
Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating. I'm so glad that even after jettisoning the last 50 covers, you have 300 that
Yes.
I think you love.
We love
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
We definitely love them. And it's our goal to continue to save vinyl LPs from mid-century.
Yeah, it's a great snapshot of an element of mid-century design that you don't often think of, in the big canons of design, furniture, architecture, film. These album covers, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of originality in many of the covers.
Janet, Jonathan, this has been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Tom at Modernism Week with Professors Janet Borgerson and Jonathan Schroeder. Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. And by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in February 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist compound? Email george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino did some heavy lifting this Modernism Week, researching dozens of guests and making me and George sound thoughtful, clever, and well-informed even when we were a little hungover. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another Sitting by the Pool, looking at the mountains, drinking martinis, talking architecture edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.